I'm very pleased that Dr. Anderson has agreed to do this without any arm twisting on that, although he's been busy for 12 hours and 6:30 in meetings and doctoral defenses and things. Dr. Anderson received his BA from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, and then went to the University of Arkansas for his MA, and he did his PhD at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. For many years, until 2004, he did largely CRM archaeology, after which he left for his academic position at Tennessee. I don't know if you still do CRM stuff since then, but anyway, he can tell me that at some point. One of the reasons I asked him to talk is because his work shows definitively, I think, how CRM archaeology can contribute to broader anthropological, archaeological general knowledge, especially theoretical concerns, which I think for a lot of in Ontario, it's lost sight of these things, but we can see how it can do really important, as we'll see in the talk tonight, I'm sure. Dr. Anderson has participated in and run many major CRM projects, which have resulted in a plethora of significant academic and technical publications. He has actually published at least 50 books and technical monographs, believe it or not, besides hundreds of articles and things. And several of our books I reference all the time or read all the time. Notably, 2 books he co-edited with Ken Sassaman on the Paleo-Indian and Early Archaic Southeast from the University of Alabama Press, and the Archaeology of the Mid-Holocene Southeast. These are landmark works on the earlier archaeology of the Southeastern United States. Aside from his prodigious writing and editing output, what impresses me is that he has done significant work running the gamut of all time periods, from exceptional paleo work. He actually maintains and started the Paleo-Indian Database of the Americas, which you can go to, and many researchers have used, that has reports on the locational data on fluted points and so on, all the way across the continent and so on. Anyway, he's worked on that from that earlier material right up to Mississippian that he's going to talk about tonight. Dr. Anderson is, I guess, truly a scholar of international reputation, is the term that's often used. And this has been recognized with the fact that he's received numerous awards. Notable examples, I'm going to just give a couple of them here, include his receipt in 1999 of the Society for American Archaeology Excellence in Cultural Resource Management Award for his research. In 2018, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Southeastern Archaeological Conference for his work in the Southeastern archaeology. And I suppose a bit of a crowning achievement for any USA scholar is that he was elected in 2014 as a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which is a very prestigious award, and not many archaeologists get it if you go to their website to see who they are, and you would recognize most of the names if you're an archaeologist on there. Now, one of his earliest awards was in 1991 for his doctoral dissertation from the University of Michigan, which was awarded the Society for American Archaeology Dissertation Prize for excellence that year. His dissertation was on the Mississippian Societies of the Southeast Midwest, and he'll be talking about some more recent research related to Mississippian societies tonight, and specifically on the CRM work that was done at the Siloh Mounds from 1999 to 2004. So it's my pleasure and honor to turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I'd like to thank Chris Ellis for inviting me, and I've gotten to know some new friends, Jim and Josh and Neil, and if there are others out there that I haven't acknowledged yet, I'm glad to meet you and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about work that I did about 20 years ago now, but it's still very important and ongoing for reasons that I'll show you. This will run about an hour, and feel free to jump in if you'd like with questions, although realize that every question will run it a little beyond that, but that's fine. I love talking about archaeology. It's only been 12 hours today, so I'm happy to keep going for a few more hours if need be. Again, these are just 3 views. You'll understand what they are in more detail of the field work that was done at Siloh. This is basically the Mounds and Plaza at Siloh. Right now, at present, the green tree-covered plaza and then mounds in the background, and then a reconstructed or an artist's view of what it might have looked like 1,000 years ago, roughly actually about, excuse me, 700 or so years ago. And you'll notice that the mounds are colored, gray or white on one side and red, perhaps with banding on the other side, and then some structures in and around them. And we'll talk about why we think that may be a possibility as part of this talk. Now, in the announcement for the lecture, the links were given for basically the report that was produced. It took about 10 years after the fieldwork was done to write the actual report. A lot of contributions by a lot of different scholars. If you're interested in this, you can download the PDF, and I believe the link was made available through the announcement for this talk. So they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. You're going to, there's a lot of thousands of words in that report, but I'll show you a lot of pictures tonight on how the project happened and some of the major findings from it. Just to give you a little bit of a perspective, a vast amount of information was collected and compiled, and these are just numbers. We took almost 11,000 photographs. We have 100 and some digital video clips. These are also all available, linked together in appendices. Thousands of pages of field notes, photographs, and so on. So that information is available. If you like this talk and would like to see a little bit more of the field work, you could go to the archaeology channel, and there's a film called In Vivid Color, which was filmed during the field work. It's about a 22-minute version, and there's also a much longer 45-minute or so version. We had a film student basically come out and work with us on the project for a week and produce a wonderful document. And the vivid color, again, refers to the colors in the mound. You can see from the stratigraphy, that's about a 7-meter profile in 2 sets, safety reasons, things like that. You can see from the top of the mound to the red subsoil at the bottom, it was a rather complex endeavor. Well, there have been 100 years and then some, actually now 121 years of archaeology that have been conducted at Shiloh. Shiloh, of course, is the location of a major battle in the American Civil War. It was called Bloody Shiloh. It was fought in early April of 1861. I believe. Forgive me for not knowing that. I should know it's 1861 or 1862. But it was basically 110,000 soldiers contested the ground for 2 days. There were 25,000 casualties, more casualties at the time than in all the battles fought in American wars up to that time, including earlier battles in the Civil War. So the result of that battle was the land was considered consecrated, sacred by the battle itself. And as a result, it was preserved and protected. And there are monuments all over a several square mile area where the battle was fought out over those 2 days. And it happened that there was a large First Peoples mound group, Indian mound group, as it's called the Shiloh Indian Mound Group National Historic Landmark, was located on the edge of the battlefield near the Tennessee River. So excavations, so it was preserved and protected. Starting in 1899, there were initial excavations. A trench was put into one of the small mounds, and a remarkable effigy figurine was found. I'll come back to that. Then in 1914, C.B. Moore, with his steamboat, the Gopher, who sailed along or steamed along southern rivers, digging mounds everywhere, he visited the site. Didn't do any real digging, but he mapped it. And the names of the mounds, the way C.B. Moore did them, A, B, C, D, E, F, he named them alphabetically, nothing original. But the large mound we'll talk about tonight was called Mound A. That's how it got its name. Then in the 1930s, a huge excavation project, one of the first relief projects in the New Deal era excavations, was conducted here. And you see trenches in the lower left-hand corner. Those are trenches viewed from the top of the mound that I'll be talking about a little later. And the director of those excavations was Frank H.H. Roberts, who later went on and dug the Lindenmeyer site. I had to make a Paleo-Indian connection. Well, Paul Welch, the figure in the center with his hand out, wrote the 100 years, a history of 100 years of archaeology at Shiloh and its findings, 1899 to 1999. And we came in immediately afterwards and started digging ourselves. And the monograph that I've given you the link for gives you sort of an updated perspective. But Paul's book is wonderful. The green arrow in the lower slide points to Mound A. What's in front is the burned floor of a house that was excavated at the time. Well, in 1899, the excavations in a small mound well to the south of Mound A located a Missouri flint clay effigy pipe. Basically, these are known to have been made in the American Bottom at Cahokia in the 10th through 12th centuries, 11th and 12th centuries. So right away, that prompted some thought, not at the time, of course, but that there might be Cahokian connections at this site. We'll come back to that later. This is the shot you've already seen in the upper left of the 1899 excavations. And then in the lower right, you see Moreau Chambers, who was with Frank Roberts, two of them co-directed the project, pointing to the outline of that trench you're seeing open in the upper left. By chance, they hit a central tomb area with a number of burials. None of those remains are left. The only thing that is left is the Siloh effigy pipe. Interestingly enough, Frank Roberts' 1933 field notes start off with cold, rainy, miserable quarters, disappointing starts. So when I started my field notes in 1999, I put sunny day, wonderful quarters, fabulous start, deliberately a counterpoint to the Roberts excavation. So what I'll be talking about is work at Mound A, but we also spent a lot of time working all over the site, mapping it, doing remote sensing, a whole host of things. But why were we excavating an Indian mound? A First Peoples mound, forgive me, that's just the way I think of it. But why were we doing that? Because frankly, preservation is the preferred option, especially on a national park, and especially when it's such a remarkable feature like a primary mound. Well, here's a view towards the plaza. It looks very serene from that view. And it was a wonderful place to work, sunny, seemingly very calm. Deer would walk across the plaza, would see turkeys, an eagle would fly below us along the river. In the lower right, you see 3 mound stages. You can sort of see the shape. I'll come back and show you more about them. But this is why we were excavating. The mound was eroding into the Tennessee River. And this is a 30-year-old shot on the right, showing the profile. It's 100 feet from the top of the mound to the Tennessee River down below. In the lower left, the US Army Corps of Engineers spent millions of dollars, a couple $1 million at least, 2 or 3 million, to put in riprap to try to preserve the bank, which was cutting in to this site. And truth be told, it was also cutting into the National Cemetery upriver, where all the bodies from at least the Union side of the Civil War battle were buried. So the park was in danger, and you can see that you can see the base of the mound in this slide. There were engineering studies done, and it was predicted that we would lose at least 20 to 25 feet of the mound within 1 to 2 decades. That's why we were doing the work. So beginning in 1999, first we did remote sensing and limited testing. Frank Roberts had a crew of over 100 people for 3 months. He dug trenches everywhere, none in Mound A, but he dug them all around it. We had no idea where they were because the map was lost in the 80 years since. So we used remote sensing to find Roberts' old trenches because we had an agreement with the Chickasaw Nation, the people who last ceded the land to the US government and then therefore have an interest in the property and NAGPRA consultation rights. We had an agreement whereby any human remains found in the mound, and there are none, you won't be seeing any of those in the slideshow, would be buried in one of those trenches at the base of the mound. And I'm not going to talk much about that, but we did find the trenches, and we did, through some test excavations, document where some of them were. But as you can see, we had multiple seasons of work, remote sensing in 1999, an intensive testing phase in 2001, which allowed us to prepare a 4-year mitigation plan. Unfortunately, things like the Iraq War and other things intervened. So the budget, after 2 seasons of mitigation, we had to close down with the excavations about half done. And then over the next 8 years, we proceeded to write up the materials. So on the left in the lower right, Mr. Kirk Perry, who's the Heritage Preservation leader basically now, and Donna Rausch, who was with the Chickasaw, is with the Chickasaw, was one of our crew chiefs on the project. This is them visiting. We had worked out a government-to-government agreement as to how the mitigation would proceed, and they were involved in the planning, and indeed were out on the site a lot of the time. And then on the left is a film crew of a historic period person likely visiting the site long after it was abandoned, but we do have some traces of people using the area much later in time. So we prepared a research design prior to each field season, and the Park Service is pretty strict on this. You don't dig on major national parks without having your ducks in a row, quite frankly. And we brought in roughly 25 specialist people who had dug mounds in the past, everyone from people like Jim Knight, Tim Pocketat, and others, Vin Stepanitis, and so on, and basically asked for their advice. What would you do? And we had 2 planning workshops in successive years, 2000, 2001, and that's how our mitigation plan came about. Again, we did about half of that. I spent 9 months in the field with a crew of about 30 people, 2002 and 2003. And it broke my heart when we had to close down halfway through. The mound is still eroding. You'll see what we did. And one of the takeaways is I give this talk with an urge. I've given this at the park twice now in the last couple of years, pointing out why they need to continue thinking about this, and hopefully that will come to pass. Well, in 1999, nobody knew the complexity of the mound. Why should we dig this mound? There had been a test put in it in 1979, a 1-meter test taken 22 feet from the top to almost to the bottom had been placed in it, and it was so small they couldn't see stratigraphy in the mound, so they said it looks like it was built in one stage. It probably isn't significant. I and my colleagues said, no, that's ridiculous. So we first did remote sensing. And the remote sensing, you can see the arrows. It showed that there's a complex stratigraphy. We didn't know what it was, but it certainly looked like there were a lot of things going on in the mound. And then in the lower right, we also did that year, and in subsequent years, we also did remote sensing out at the base of the mound, looking for Frank Roberts trenches at the top. By the Mound A area, you can see one of those trenches. We checked that out with test pits and said, yes, there is a filled-in trench here, as well as a lot of houses. So again, the only thing we actually did a lot of digging at was Mound A, and it was in the area threatened. We did not, other than testing to find those trenches, we did not dig in other parts of the site. So here's just an example of the remote sensing that we did. To the south of Mound A and in front of Mound A, to the west. We used several different techniques: ground penetrating radar, magnetometry, electrical resistivity. We also did metal detecting. In some cases we needed to, because the burned house that I showed you, it's Mound J in the lower right of the slide. Basically, Robert's stakes, metal stakes, were still present in the ground, and they threw off some of our remote sensing. So here are shots of the field work as it was underway. We did an initial 1-meter trench up one side, across the top, and down the other, just to get an initial sense of the stratigraphy. The Park Service put in a stairway for us because they realized going up and down the side of the mound was very dangerous. Let me tell you, a clay mound, when it gets wet, is incredibly slick. And within one season, a wonderful stairway was put in place. The slides at the bottom show you some of the procedures. We had to use scaffolding. The profile was some 15 feet high, 4.5 meters. In one section, it was about 3 in another. We had to use things like that just to get to some of the things we were excavating. On the left bottom, you see, this is what a mound excavation really looks like. It's not the clean, wonderful images you're going to see in the next slide. Because when you have a lot of people working, you have to think about everything from what are they going to step on, pieces of wood, for example, and you're moving fill and so on. So to get shots like this, you have to have activity like that. And if you're wondering, there'll be a lot of shots from one view. We put a deer stand up against a huge oak tree and took shots throughout the project. So there's always a consistent view. We also had other deer stands. We had another deer stand on top of the mound to get aerial shots. But these are showing you the procedures. We were going into the mound at about 1 meter a week towards the end, and profiling and photographing and drawing the profiles, and moving into the mound, at least the fill of the stage 3 mound. You can see the outline in the upper left-hand shot. We were moving in very quickly into the mound at that point. The Park Service had previously done a reconstruction, a painting of mound excavation from the Depression era excavations. This is actually a mound in Tennessee being excavated in the lower right. They decided to do a reconstruction or a painting of the excavations we were undertaking. And the guy at the top of the mound in the red t-shirt is my co-director, John Corneliuson. He handled logistics. He's a great archaeologist in his own right, but he was on the cell phone handling the administrative details all the time. And I said, John, you talk to the bosses back at the Park Service. I'm going to be down there digging. I'm the guy in the blue in the middle with the funny hat in the middle of the frame. So it was a multidisciplinary project. We had a geoarchaeologist involved, Sarah Sherwood. She was the third co-PI. There were 3 of us, John, Sarah, and I. We had Glenn Doran from the University of Florida come up with a vibrocore, take coring, that's Burley Clay in the lower left, doing remote sensing. So it was quite a team effort. And I'll come back to the one in the middle of why are we vibrocoring in the middle of a pond? I'll come back to that in a bit. So when you're digging a mound, we started at the top and went down. We didn't know what was on the bottom. I mean, we kind of did because I'll show you later, we rappelled off the side and looked, but we labeled our stages from the top to the bottom. So the top stage 1, most people would say, oh, that's at the bottom. No, our stage 1 is at the top. We'll come back to that. We learned a lot over the course of these several field seasons. Like, you don't want to walk on wonderfully clean floors, so we learned how to put pieces of plywood down. When you're 100 feet above the river, you have to be safe. That's a safety fence with strands of steel wire that we put in, and people near the edge were wearing safety harnesses. And we went down into the mound. We wound up going down 15 feet in one place, 22 feet in another. We had to continually move that fence outward and downward. So the person's literally got a post hole digger there moving the safety fence down. I will say no one was seriously injured on this project, although we did have one crew person come down with a tick-borne illness that was very serious. The person survived, but we had people from the CDC giving us lessons on tick-borne illnesses, us and the entire park staff after that, but no one had any serious injuries. So this is clearing the face of the mound. We had originally hoped that if we rappel down the sides, we could shovel skim it and we would understand the stratigraphy very easily. However, there was a lot of slumping, a lot of vegetation, and it was really dangerous, even when you're tied in. So we said, no, we're going to go from the top and from the sides down into the mound. The logistics grew more complex each season. This was a screening area at the top. During the first field season, we actually literally dry screened fill the first season. We realized that was never going to work, but we had walkways to prevent erosion of the mound. And I'll show you the way we examined the fill. We ultimately screened hundreds of cubic meters, somewhere 700 or 800 cubic meters of fill our system became more and more elaborate. We had sunshades with basically to keep the area cooler because frankly, we were digging in some cases in the summer in the south and the temperatures would be approaching 100 degrees. You see tarps that we pulled up to keep areas dry. We were also in a place that was the highest spot around. When thunderstorms came up, we had to cover the units very quickly. We got so that we could do that within 10 minutes, shut completely down, cover them up before lightning bolts started to pop. And we actually had lightning bolts pop within about 1,000 feet of us. We can see one pop in the plaza while we were working on the top. So we had to learn how to very quickly set up and break down. Using grocery store materials, basically these are things they sell in grocery stores to move stock around, and at least they did back then. We developed a rail system for moving fill off the mound, and I think this is partially because my co-PI John Corneliuson loved railroad trains as a kid or something, but he built a wonderful rail system. We learned things like you have to have a removable walkway so you don't break your neck stepping on these rollers, and we had little sidings to move barrels of fill. We used 55-gallon drums of fill, and they were tagged with masking tape with a bag inside with the tag as well. And we shuttled them to a water screening area. And here's the test of our water screening system. The first one didn't go very well. So we developed that system to move fill off the mound, but we tested it very carefully. And that's the first successful test. We didn't want to use archaeological fill on this. We also had filtration and hay bales to keep water from going back into the Tennessee River. So we ran literally hundreds of barrels of fill off the top of the mound. It was 20 feet to the screening area down below. And that's just showing you the system in use. We wanted to screen a lot of the fill. We still sample stage fill, but we did do a tremendous amount of screening of fill. We thought we had a lot more time. If I'd known we were going to be closed down at two seasons, we would have gone through the mound, but we thought we had a lot more time, another 9 months with 30 people. So we're 100 feet above the Tennessee River. We had a well point we put down in the river, down by that concrete or that riprap that I showed you before, and pumped water up to a 2,500-gallon storage container. And then using an electrical system, a generator system behind the mound in the background, we basically had water screening set up. Now, we were not completely brilliant figuring these things out. The first month or so, we had the generator right at the base of the mound and wondered why we couldn't hear anything or talk to anyone. So we had the sense that, we'll just put it a few hundred feet away behind another mound and run electrical wire. So we did that, and it was much more peaceful. It was quiet. The only way we knew that the generator ran out was when the water cut off. We also basically covered the mound after each field season very carefully, because while we were not digging around the clock, we had to come back, and we did not want the profiles flooded. And believe me, it rains a lot, and it was a serious concern. So we were very careful closing up, sandbagging, and covering the mounds at each season after we were done. This is just showing you that activity. We learned very quickly that 50 by 100 foot tarps are absolutely wonderful. Initially, we had a much more elaborate pieces of plywood and much smaller tarps, and we realized we needed to cover the mound up in 10 minutes or so, because you'll see some larger exposures shortly. All it takes is 10 minutes of rain, and you've lost hours and hours of cleaning. Your profiles can be damaged. It can be a bad thing. So we learned a lot about sandbagging, a tremendous amount. And believe me, we filled more sandbags than you could ever imagine, but they were absolutely crucial. If you wonder why those profiles are 15 feet high and still there, it's because of things like this. This is my pickup truck. I think the engine actually is made in Canada. I'm not sure, but I got it because it said, you know, made in the USA, and then the engine was made in someplace in Ontario. So that's still cool. That's close enough. I mean, but anyway, you see, it got very filthy and hauling a lot of things back and forth. Um, so from the top down, there were 7 major construction episodes that were in this mound. And they're labeled here, and I'm going to come back to them, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with them. These stages were delimited by our project geoarchaeologist. This is being filmed, so you'll have time to look at it. Basically, she had developed a mound fill classification scheme that had been developed by Van Ness for Hopewellian sites. This is her taking soil samples for micromorphological studies, doing thin section analyses and so on, looking at the way soil layers were put together. And this red band, I'll come back to in a few more 50 or so slides. I'll show you that a little later. We also, after the field work was over, we began radiocarbon dating. And we have about 50 dates from the site between AMS radiocarbon, thermoluminescent, and we think we have a pretty good handle on when a few of the stages were built, but my feeling now is to date a mound well, you really need about 100 dates and a dozen per stage. And we didn't know that at the time, but we do now. But anyway, we've modeled the construction episodes of these stages. I'll come back and talk with them a little bit more. But basically, we have a pretty good idea of the construction history of the mound. One of the things that was interesting is we did do thermoluminescent dating of a number of potsherds from the mound. They consistently came out 50 to 100 years earlier. They were in the logical order, but they came out a century or so earlier than our AMS dates. But we were trying different procedures because we didn't know how well carbon would be preserved. It turns out much deeper in the mound, it was remarkably well preserved. So we have multiple lines of evidence supporting of this, the dating of this center from circa 80, 1000 to 1300, based on ceramics, old-fashioned archaeology way, radiocarbon dating, thermoluminescent dating, and then we have this pond full of water again in front of a mound, and I'll come back to that again in a little bit. We know mound construction began around 980 to 1000 AD, based on calibrated dates from the base of the mound. There were post holes in the subsoil at the base of the mound. We were able to date carbon. The most intensive period of use, which I've shown you images of, was the stage 3 mound. That's stage 3 from the top. We have 12 dates showing that it was built and used in a period of 21 or so years. And then after 1246, say 1250, the site was abandoned within about 50 years. However, we do have some late dates after that suggesting historic First Peoples use of the area. Now, another thing, we know that many centers are fortified at this time level. These are sites, Cahokia and Etowah, and then Rucker's Bottom. That's a palisaded village I excavated about 40 years ago. The Park Service did a drawing of that. Siloh itself has one of the most remarkable palisades surviving features. You can see the red arrows pointing to the map of the site. And on the left is the traditional map. We did total station mapping. Then we added in digital elevation model dating, or mapping data. And you can see the palisade line showing up. And there are some other linear features, one of which running across the middle. We have no idea what that is. We actually did a test pit in it. We think it might be a Civil War battle line, but we have no idea. It doesn't seem related to the Indian occupation. We just don't know. So there's a lot we don't know about the site. Well, here's that pond. It's near a mound. You may or may not be able to see it, but in the background, beyond where those people are standing, is called Mound G. C.B. Moore's name for it. Union soldiers were buried in that mound after the Battle of Shiloh. They were re-excavated in 1865 after the end of the war and buried in the National Cemetery. But we did remote sensing, and it looks like they may have left some things or people there. But that's a different story for the future. I had previously worked with Hazel and Paul Delcourt, palynologists, in the late 1980s. and they taught me that good places to find pollen cores. And duckweed's a good sign, and never drying out is a good sign. And I saw this pond inside the palisade line, right off the plaza, and I said, has that ever dried out? And the park personnel said, no, not in any of our memories. So I said, we're going to check that for pollen. We did, and we have an 8,000 plus year pollen record inside the palisade at Shiloh. That is pretty cool. It's one of the only things that and only sites that I know where you can say you have something like that. Now, to go a little further, we had to take 2 cores because it costs a lot of money to do the investigations. The first core we took, the analyst said, we know we've got a Holocene record here. It's old, it's got a lot of good material, but we had a bad date from the bottom, a recent date. And I said, I want to get another core because I don't want to invest the resources on what could be disturbance. So we got another core, and then Scott Meeks did a palynological and microcharcoal analysis of the material. The slide at the top on the right shows charcoal frequency. And there was an age depth model, so we know the approximate age of the where the pollen and charcoal samples were coming from. What you're seeing there is the burning associated with the clearing, major use of the center, and then the abandonment of the center around 1300. And it's reflected in the bottom slide in terms of a decrease in the hardwood forest in the area. You see that the hardwood drops a bit. So that pollen evidence with the age depth model is another line of evidence for the age of the site. Now, what's really cool about this pollen core, there's a lot cool about it, but we found sunflower seeds in the pollen core, but we didn't find any maize. Now, maize pollen only travels 50 or 100 feet. So it's perhaps not surprising, but sunflowers were apparently being grown inside the palisade line, maize perhaps outside. So that was an interesting finding. More cores may tell us a different story, but that's very interesting. So basically, the field work took place over 4 fields over five years. We recovered a lot of material, everything from archaeomagnetic samples to soil samples to thousands of, 1,600 or so flotation samples, 65,000 roughly ceramics, lots of material. That's why it took 8 or 9 years to write up. And for those of you that were expecting a Paleo-Indian talk, this is the surprise. We actually found the base of a Clovis point in the fill of the mound. It was brought in as part of the stage. You know, it's a really wretched, nasty Clovis point by your Ontario standards. I realize, I know you have wonderful artifacts up there, but I heard only Dave Anderson could dig a Mississippian mound and find a Clovis point when that turned up. So it was brought in by fill. Those other materials are fill from where the fill for the mound came from, which is primarily in the area. There were earlier occupations. So these artifacts, and I won't show you all 100-some thousand of them, but I'm going to show you a few that were very interesting. Some of them show connections at great distances from sites like Etowah and Cahokia and Moundville. Shiloh was a major center at the time. And these are objects, artifacts that were found at the site, all of which very likely came from far away. And I'll go over them in a little more detail. You don't have to read the caption, you'll have it. Of course, the flint clay effigy pipe in the mound to the south of the main mound. This could be brought in from Cahokia, traded in. It might reflect a founding lineage, visitors. We don't know. Somebody from Shiloh may have made a pilgrimage to Cahokia and brought it back. But it's very similar to other effigy pipes. There is a possible chert blade that resembles Ramey knives from Cahokia. Some of these were found in the Depression era excavations, some since. These aren't all things that we found. There were micro drills. Cahokia is known for a microlithic industry, also found at the Zebra site in Northeast Arkansas and elsewhere in the Mississippian period. There were micro drills found in the late Archaean at Poverty Point, but we found micro drills made of chert at Shiloh, which also suggests that they were going back and forth. There are discoidals in what's called a Cahokia style of chunky stone or discoidal. Maybe they were brought in, maybe they were copied. We don't know, but that's interesting as well. And then only 3 sherds of possible Ramian size have been found. We found one of them. The thin section suggests it's a local copy. It doesn't seem to be made of the same paste as in the American bottom. It appears that the local people made and copied it, copied the design. There's also Etowah nested triangles, lots of sherds lots, 50 or so from North Georgia, and then engraved pottery from Moundville. Most of the pottery from Siloh is plain with fairly minimal incising. So I'm only showing you the elaborate extra local material. I could show you literally tens of thousands of plain shell tempered pottery. Again, it's suggestive. Jim Stoltman did the petrographic analysis of it. And then these are 2 sherds found in the Depression era that basically they're at the Smithsonian. They were not examined. They could be from Cahokia. They could be local copies. And here's just a close-up of the Etowah nested diamonds. Siloh was plugged in to a lot of major sites. So those are some of the things we found. Now I'm going to show you what we found when we were digging. And how are we? 8:21. I'll try to speed it up. I hope you don't mind this. Basically, these are the 3 post holes at the base of the mound where we got early radiocarbon dates. Basically, the A horizon had been stripped off, scraped, and whatever was there, we didn't open a large enough window to see. But that red soil on the right is the subsoil. And then it was scraped to just above that, and then fill started going in, and there eventually wound up being 7 meters of fill. Going back, the radiocarbon dates from those posts came back about 975 to 1025. Then midden accumulated for a time. We didn't get far enough into the mound to see if it started to slope up into a small initial stage. We do know that the area around the mound in its final form had been cleared, and there's an apron 2 meters deep around the existing mound that suggests they were either building up soil to put on a massive final stage, or it's very clear they were doing a lot of preparation of the ground around the mound. As I said, they stripped off the subsoil and then started putting in layers of fill. So deliberate filling episodes. In the middle of the slide on the right, that's a hearth. There would be a filling episode. It would be open. There'd be posts in it, structures, and then another layer of fill would be put in. We were hoping we'd start seeing sloped surfaces, but that didn't happen. The main construction that made up a lot of the volume of the mound was what we call the stage 3 mound from the top. You can see basically it's got elaborate colors in it. I'll come back to that. But it went up in about 20 years, sometime in the middle half of the 13th century AD. And you can see my colleagues looking down. We had to have the safety fence on the stairway for good reasons. And you can see the profiles are immaculately clean. We put a lot of effort into preserving them and documenting them. Now that stage 3 mound had a number of small structures atop it. We were looking for a big temple. That might have been closer to the plaza on the other side of the mound that's not threatened. We were again focusing on the area that was predicted to slump into the Tennessee River. So we did find a number of small structures atop this surface and we explored them. We also, interestingly enough, found a large post pit with preserved wood inside it in an insertion trench. This was the first thing built atop the stage 3 mound. And we like to think it's a marker post, like are comparable at major sites. There are marker posts at other sites. Mound 72 at Cahokia, there's a huge one on Monk's Mound. Who knows, but this is a post that was the first thing because there were 2 structures later built atop it. And indeed on the slide on the left, those that's a wall trench with tagged individual posts. So that was a pretty remarkable feature. This is one of the structures exposed. There's a wall trench around it, but the floor was compact clay. That's a central hearth, and that's showing upon clearing. And I'll come back. You notice that there's a red platform. That's a stage 2 mound platform. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Another structure, this is the structure that basically had that large central post through it. You may not be able to see it very well, but can you see that is the central post right there. It was put in first. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but anyway, in the middle of that, right in front of the scale and north arrow is a post. What was interesting about that structure was when it was abandoned, apparently basketry was put into the fire and burned. We found preserved carbonized fabric in that hearth. And when we found that, I said, actually, I got on my cell phone and I called Jim Adavazio. And it was the Sermon on the Mound, basically holding my cell phone up and saying, Jim, we've got this hearth with what looks like carbonized textile in it. What do we do? And he said, take it out en bloc, en masse. Fortunately, the guy in the purple shirt in the lower left was a geology student who had worked on dinosaur digs before. So he said, I know how to do this. So we took the hearth out, slid a steel frame underneath it, which may represent a road sign from Shiloh that we had permission to take, actually. But we hammered it under the hearth, and then we wrapped the whole mess in plaster. And you can see us taking out, in another slide, charred matting was found in another structure atop the mound. This is showing the, let me go back a second to that one. Okay, there it is. Took it out, and let me, okay, can you see everything okay there?
Yep.
Okay. That's removing additional matting. And Adavazio's analysis was able to show the type of weaving that took place. Now we have gotten the fill of this back, and it's at our lab here at Tennessee. And it broke my heart because I could see big potsherds in that. We finally got it back and just in the last year, and I'm looking forward to analyzing that pottery. Okay, here we are. This is what I was looking for. It took 8 of us to pick this thing up and put it in my pickup truck, which was near that 100-foot drop. And I'm thinking, I hope this doesn't end badly. Fortunately, it didn't. And we took it out, and then Adavazio, we hauled it up to where he was, Mercyhurst College, with all the other matting samples and so on. And he took it apart slowly and did the analyses. Here are other views of the other structures that we found. Those are posts. What was interesting is the posts had apparently rotted in place or been pulled because they were hollow. It was really neat because you could literally, for some of these structures, you could literally take off a layer of dirt at the top and you'd be looking down into a foot or 2 deep hole that hadn't been filled in a long time. This is another structure, and above it, you see that the soil is gray. That's what we call a platform. That's a mound built atop the stage 3 mound. It's a small mound. There were 2 small mounds atop the stage 3 mound in this area. So these are just examples of some of the things that we found. That's burning on the floor. There was massive amounts of carbonized thatch, things like that, daub. Here's showing again just different views of the structures and the plans. We didn't dig up against the side of the mound in on the lower right, that image. We left a buffer because the mound was very seriously undercut there. And we really thought if we get there and start doing work, it could collapse under us and we could lose people. So what did we do? We took 1 meter, every 1 meter square for all of these samples. For all of these structures, we took 3 samples: pollen, soil chemistry, and 1 for the future. And we conducted specialized analyses over all of these structures. That's a chapter in the report. Basically, we were able to document the different things were occurring in different structures. And some of them may have been food preparation, others not much, we're not sure. But there were different things going on. So that was interesting. Now, when these structures were abandoned, there were what we call ritual termination episodes. And this was fascinating because in the lower right, you're seeing black, yellow, and red soil. The total thickness of that is about a centimeter. There were 3 successive layers of colored soil placed over that state that you can see it in the diagram, the 2A and 2B structures. Those structures were used for 10 or 20 years, and when they were abandoned, the posts were pulled, including maybe that big central support post if it was still there, and these colored soils were put over it. The other structure that you see in the upper left, when that was abandoned, the same thing happened. Colored red soil, red silt was put in that case. Okay, I'll come back to the stage 3 mound in a little bit, but I wanted to say that above the stage 3 mound were 2 further stages. One, stage 2, we don't know we only got a few dates from it. It was heavily eroded. It was only about 1 meter below the surface. We had basically 2 small platforms with a basin in between, and you can see that in the pictures there. And some mounds at this time period in eastern Tennessee, they do have twin structures atop the platforms, atop smaller mounds. So we think that might have been what was going on here. Another view of it just showing the stratigraphy. Believe me, when you're digging from the top down, coming on these things, it can be very confusing. And sometimes you have to dig down a bit, and we were just careful to differentiate the fill and notice when changes occur. Mounds are like 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzles, and you don't know which way the fill is going to go in some cases. So it was an incredibly complicated challenge. Well, this is the gray platform, and you can see in the lower right, it's resting atop that red termination layer. There's a structure below that, and when that structure was abandoned and then the red soil was put over it, gray silt was used to build the stage above that. And that was, again, pretty remarkable. That atop the stage 2 mound, and it turns out atop that gray mound, we had the remains of what we think are ledges from some kind of a structure. Now we know there's an earth lodge at Macon Plateau, a ceremonial structure where there are ledges, clay ledges, which we believe are where benches were. We don't know that for a fact, but that's what we think. And we think we have something like that here. Atop the stage 2 mound, and indeed atop all of the mounds, we found fire horrors. These are just showing you those atop that mound and showing you the level of intrusion of trees, tree roots. In the upper right, you can see that. It was challenging to take these out. In the left, you see a hearth that was intruded by something, a large post. In the middle, at the bottom, when you find a hearth, it's like a ring of red-fired clay with charcoal in the middle. And then when you dig down, it turns into something like what you see on the lower right. For me, it's just fascinating. We took all of the fill from these as flotation samples. The mound was abandoned. The mound center was abandoned sometime around 1300 or very shortly after, based on all the lines of evidence we have. There was very little preserved atop the 3rd stage, or the top of the final stage. In fact, there was nothing. It was so eroded. The only thing we found were traces of historic materials. This is literally, we think this is a foundation post and a beam. The superintendent at Shiloh at the turn of the 20th century built a cottage atop the mound. And we know that he used to go out there and hang out because it was an incredible view of the river. We literally had bald eagles that were soaring out in front of us while we were working. There's also a story that there was a gas explosion and it burned down. That's the story, and it's pretty much believe it's true. But this is some of the only things that we found atop the mound. So I'm winding it down now. I'll promise to have you out of here within at least another hour and a half, more like 20, 30 minutes. But we're getting near the end, and I appreciate you bearing with me. You saw a lot of colored soils, a lot of elaborate ceremony that went into this mound. In the upper right, you see that there are different layerings of fill. The gray and brown, we call that the tabby cat midden. The and the orange or the yellow and brown we call the tiger striped midden. These are just filling episodes. And then you see a remarkable fill that is red, it's bright red silt and it has white pebbles in it. The stage 3 mound in particular was remarkable. And then in the lower right of that image, you see basket loads of fill. So we basically put a lot of time into documenting how this mound was built. And here's an example of that red fill. We found it in our initial 1 meter trench and followed it up. Basically, it's red silt with white pebbles. Well, red and white are they're colors important to Southeastern Indians, warfare, peace, things like that. Very intentional. This also had to be covered quickly because if it rained, it would wash away. It's literally silt. Another filling episode was literally lumps of red, gray, and white clay that had been mixed together. They were little lumps about the size at most of a marble, typically smaller like a pea. They had been mixed together into a mixture and then put in. So remarkable care went into the building of this mound. And many of these materials, Sarah Sherwood documented, they're found in that 100-foot face. They're found where erosional gullies cut into that face. You can find these materials close at hand. So the people had them and they used them. Now, one of the major conclusions of this work that we had sort of hints of before was that our traditional view of mounds looked like this. And indeed, just about every picture you've seen up until the 21st century of a First Peoples mound group looks like this. In reality, this may have been what they really looked like. So you go back and forth. And Mayan temples certainly look like this. Aztec temples look like this. Why can't First Peoples sites look like this? And indeed, we think that at least in some cases and in some places they were. Corin Purcell in the upper left was a student on this dig. He later went on and did a master's thesis where he documented colored fills at dozens of mounds in the Southeast and Midwest. So that was something that we documented at the site. And then Sarah Sherwood and T.R. Kidder wrote a wonderful paper called The Da Vinci's of Dirt, which basically talked about the engineering skills and the ceremony that went into the construction of these mounds. So that's a major lesson that we learned from this project. So if you wondered at the start why I said the view of the mound, notice the colored mounds, the red on one side, the white on the other, that appears from our interpretation of earlier field records, mostly from the Depression era. That appears to be what is going on. Now, again, it would take major excavations at the site to document that, and it wasn't every stage. The stage 3 mound in Mound A was clearly elaborately decorated. Some of the other stages had routine midden fill with subsistence remains, things like that. But there were times in which great care and ceremony went into this center. This may be what it looked like, it may not. This is just an artistic reconstruction. Stay tuned. I would put much larger structures on the front of that big Mound A and then much smaller ones along the back. But anyway, that's the way I would view that mound based on what we found. And again, it would have been nice to know what else was there, but it was not threatened, so we didn't excavate at it. Again, this took very careful field work. It's one of the things I'm really proud of, that we noticed this thin fill. It was literally a centimeter or less. And we said, I wonder if we can peel that back and expose it and see what's going on. And we did. And that's what we came up with. So going from that to that and dealing with silt, that was a challenge. Again, we had a lot of resources for this project, so we were able to put the time in. And again, if I'd known we weren't going to be going back, I might have blown through the rest of the mound, but then we probably wouldn't have found things like this. We would have gone through them. And indeed, I suspect archaeologists for 100 years have been doing that in the Southeast, blowing through and missing some of these more ephemeral features. So lessons: you can never have too many photographs. This is a much younger me being stupid. I told my crew, never do what you see me do. Do what I say, not what I do. That red band, you'll see it in the next slide. That was from the first season profiling the mound. trying to get a sense. We definitely recognized strata, but we couldn't figure it out. And then you see with the red arrow pointing to that same strata, it was about 15 feet down, but we eventually dug down to it. Always have geoarchaeologists involved in your projects, and then record everything carefully, profiles, take samples, because you don't know, it might mean something later that you don't realize now. Don't ignore paleo-environmental opportunities. Who would know that a pond like this could lead to a 9,000-year pollen record with very great detail for the period of late pre-contact occupation. The earlier part of the core is more, it's more compressed, but we have wonderful separation for the last 1,000 or so years. So what did we do? We were told we had to shut down, and we did in August 2004. And we brought in 28 dump trucks of clay, not sand or silt. We wanted to try to give this mound a chance to survive, because we didn't know when we would dig there again, and we haven't in 15 years, and it sort of breaks my heart. But we put that clay cap over it, and this is what it looked like in 2004. And I've gone back every few years to check on it since. And indeed, in 2014, erosion is starting to eat through that cap. That's a slide. There's vegetation growing up. It's kept that way because the roots help stabilize it, but also the visitors would be appalled from that safety fence if they actually saw the erosion taking place. So I've given talks at the Mound twice in the last 5 years saying you really need to explore this. The reason we didn't dig at that one end of the mound is because this is what it looks like right below it. It's very unstable, and we had to be very careful digging. In a lot of places, it was sloped 50, 60 degrees, but in other places, it was a shear face and could collapse. So total station mapping, I've shown you that. I've shown you how it helped us understand where the fortification lines were. Well, you've all heard of LIDAR. One of the things that we did as part of a project that was looking for mass burials on the battlefield site, and it was looking, we already know where the locations of a number of burials of Confederate soldiers are. They were put in mass graves. There was a study run by our forensic team to basically see if there are signatures of mass graves. And I said, well, while you're there, can you overfly the mound group? And this was a NASA plane, I believe, and they did. It was so wonderful. And those are the flight lines over the mound group. And we were able to take that data. This is flight lines that went right over the top of Mound A. And from the profiles extrapolated from that, we can see that the mound is eroding. We've got the extent of it, we can see this is as of 2017. And the LIDAR imagery, I hate to think of how much time we spent with the total station mapping this in 1999 and 2001 and 2. And if, LIDAR imagery gave us remarkable contour data, as you can see in this slide. And you can see the Palisade line fairly well. We never were able to follow it all the way around, but we were able to follow it a good way around, much further than had been documented previously. So you can see house mounds, those are smaller mounds on the site, the main mound and so on. That's basically some of what we've done. There's a monograph you can download. I just wrote a paper that came out earlier this year on the Cahokian connection that came out that was just released. I can provide a PDF to that. But a lot more could be done out there, and we're lucky we haven't lost it. It was predicted that we would lose at least 25 feet of the mound within 2 decades, and we could potentially lose half of it. And that's still a possibility. It's not eroding as fast as we thought it would, but that's because of a 28 dump trucks load of clay, but that needs to be reconsidered as well. So I'd like to thank a whole lot of people that were involved in this. I appreciate your attention. My apologies for going on. I said I would keep this to an hour. It was an hour and 10 minutes or so. And that's basically it. And that's what you probably were looking for. Those are other aspects of my life: Paleo Indian points and mapping archaeological sites and sea level rise.